stay here for the question period. I asked Peter Copland to come back. So we leave this first section before John Otto takes over the question period with Banting and Bess riding high in Canada, professorships, grants, newspaper coverage, all the glory. And poor MacLeod, poor Collop, who did also to finish the work, a word hardly to be found. So we'll have to wait for the second half here to get the rest of the story. Peter, please come forward. And John Otto, will you lead the question period?
I will indeed. Thank you, John. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take a little time before the intermission, the tea break, for a few questions or comments, indeed, if you wish to make them. So please raise your hand if you want to ask a question or to speak. There's a button labelled Speak next to your microphone at each individual desk, so you can simply raise your hand, ask a question, and we will let one of the panel answer that question for you. So that's it, as simple as that. Does anyone have any questions of the first round of speakers? I think you're all looking to get your tea break a little bit quicker. And if there aren't many questions in this session here, we will catch up a little bit because we've run slightly behind. So any hands showing? They've got one across here. Marilla. Just a little button on the black bar. Just press it once.
You can tell I've not been in the University Senate for a while. Thank you so much for the beautiful talks. I really enjoyed the historical perspective, and it's so nice to hear these different stories. So I'm just wondering how much knowledge of these stories there is within Toronto itself. Have you told the same stories in Toronto, and how is that received?
Who wants to answer that one?
Hi. I've been involved with quite a few of these storytelling exercises. As a professional medical historian, I've been involved with curating one of the main exhibits we do have there, in what's called the Mars Building. It's kind of a mecca. It's turned into a mecca. It's not on the university campus directly, but across the street, across from the Banting Institute. It's actually quite a nice place. It's been up since the 90th anniversary, so over 12 years now. And Michael Bliss actually got me involved with that particular project as sort of curating it. And that's actually been a good focus. And then the whole 100th anniversary exercise over the last 3+ years particularly has provided opportunities through a number of websites and other exhibits, other projects that I've been involved with personally, as sort of my motto as a professional medical historian was making history matter. So kind of telling the story like similarly how I told it, in a way that's kind of accessible, but also well-grounded. And also I feel, as one of Michael's students, personally in a way, because this is passing, and you talk a lot about the 100th anniversary, to make sure this is done well and done in a balanced way that recognizes the four discoverers. A key project that probably exemplifies that was what we call the Heritage Minute. Historica Canada has been sponsoring a whole series of literally minutes, little videos for the past, I don't know how long it's been going on, since the 80s at least, on all kinds of topics. They never actually got around to this one. But we were asked, Alison Lee, you'll hear later from us, and also Grant Maltman, who manages the Banting House Museum in London, Ontario, the birthplace of insulin. We worked on that project together, and it was very driven by the idea to make sure, even in the 60 seconds, how we tell the Leonard Thompson story, that's done the way that recognizes the four principal people in a balanced way, at least visually, if not by name. So there's been a lot of efforts to do that, and building on Michael's work and our own particular expertise in different areas to bring the story to the public, in a real way. It's not just a fun way or overly academic way, but in a real personal way. And it's really struck home with diabetics particularly, and the public and the media and so forth. So it's been good.
Thank you, Chris. We've got a question up at the back here.
Just check my mic's on. Yes, I think it is, isn't it? Yes. Can I just thank you all there for those really great talks? I sat here and learnt so much more just by listening to those. I told somebody I was coming up here earlier this week for the ceremony, and they said, "Oh, what's that all about?" And so the way I explained it, and I've often used this in talks I've given on the discovery of insulin, I've said, look, October 1923, Frederick Banting's phone rings, and he receives the phone call that I reckon every scientist must secretly dream of receiving. The news that you've just been awarded the Nobel Prize. And his response is not one of utter joy. He's not turning cartwheels. He is absolutely livid. His response is of utter raging fury, and he jumps in his car and he drives across Toronto, probably knuckles turning white as he's clutching the steering wheel, and he's absolutely furious. And you tell people that and they're hooked. They're like, why? And you say it's because he was going to go and have it out with MacLeod. It was the fact that the prize had not just been awarded to him, but he had to share it with MacLeod. And no matter how many times I read that always gets me. I think, where is your head at that when you've just been awarded the most prestigious award in science, instead of being glass half full, it's glass half empty. It's not been awarded just to me. I've got to share it. And I just always think that's such a wonderful insight into, well, the somewhat sour relationship between the two men. I would urge everyone here to see if you can track down the film that Chris put up on his last slide there, Glory Enough for All. I tried to find it on DVD. It's out there on YouTube somewhere. Hasn't digitized that well, but it is watchable. If you've got a few hours spare, check it out and watch it. But yeah,
It was on what's called CBC streaming service. I'm not sure it's available overseas, but it's GEM, CBC GEM. So there is a pristine copy of it, and it is on YouTube. Not the best, but not so bad.
I'll check it out. Thanks, Chris. But
So I've had that same series of thoughts in exactly that way. And I'll add one more little puzzling aspect to it, was that as Banting is angrily driving across town to meet with MacLeod, he doesn't even know MacLeod is out of town. So I mean, you can see how closely meshed, the four collaborators, were. He's there, as you said, going to speak his mind to MacLeod, and he's not even aware that MacLeod is traveling. It really is kind of an astounding situation. I'm always, as John mentioned, I mean, some people have suspected that, maybe, Banting did have PTSD. His reactions to things were not, normal. And I think that, it would be interesting to try to write a paper on why Banting hated MacLeod. Nobody's ever really taken that topic on, but, they were very different individuals. MacLeod was this extremely well-educated, sophisticated, intellectual, and Banting was a raw farmer's boy. He, straight off the farm, he goes to medical school at U of T. He graduates a year early because they're in the middle of World War I and they need doctors in France. And so everything about them were different. I mean, he didn't have any real training in research. He had done a little bit of neurosurgical research while he was in London, helping a physiologist, but all of this was totally new to him. And, nowadays, when a graduate student comes into a situation, you slowly move your way into understanding, the academic atmosphere and how, how research works. And Banting was not given the benefit of, MacLeod couldn't mentor him on that because he didn't like MacLeod. And so, you need somebody to kind of mentor you. I mean, Banting was upset that MacLeod was a co-recipient because he said, well, MacLeod was in Europe at the time, but, MacLeod was there for, part of one summer. And it was not, like MacLeod hadn't, met with him, provided him guidance on how to get the project started, provided everything that was needed to get it started, and then was there at the end of the summer to suggest the additional studies that needed to be done to make it believable to scientists elsewhere. And so, Banting thought he had discovered insulin in August of 1921, but nobody else in the world would have believed that. MacLeod knew that. They needed to do more experiments. They needed the clinical verification that Collip was able to provide by purifying the substance. And so Banting saw it as a very tiny problem that, was, I did these animal experiments and I proved it right then and there, but not to the satisfaction of the world. Other people had done equally good studies as Banting and Best, or better, elsewhere in the world, and nobody believed them.
Yeah, I think indeed, Colonel, maybe correct me if I'm wrong here, but 6 times prior to Banting and Best getting as far as they did, others had done so up to 15 years prior. Banting was genuinely convinced that he had discovered insulin at the end of July, beginning of August in 1921, and indeed he hadn't got any further than people had before. So the true date of discovery is the January date in the following year. I think we'll maybe stop there unless somebody's got any burning questions. One more, okay?
Thank you all very much indeed. I noticed that on the new Canadian $50 bill, there's a mention of the discovery of insulin. And when I looked up the website associated with that, it mentioned Banting and Best.
Oh.
It's actually the $100 bill. That came out in 2011 for the 9th anniversary. I had some involvement with that and putting what's on there is a vial, a little picture of a vial of insulin. It's a Connaught Labs insulin vial. I work with the Bank of Canada on it. Yeah, a part of it is limited space. There's sort of pragmatic elements that get involved in these kind of situations when you work on things like stamps and heritage minutes and any kind of media kind of things like that. And so there's still the broader public mind, Banting and Best, whether they call it a myth or not, but at least it rolls off the tongue easier. It's just a more simple form. And it's also driven the subsequent years, since that was 2011, to continue that effort and making sure, again, I mentioned the Heritage Minute, making sure it does say the 4 of them. And while we're doing these other events we've been doing over the last few years, including what we're doing right now, to make sure in the public mind it gets beyond just Banting and Best to recognize Collip and MacLeod as well. So it's a long-going process, even in Canada. So, it's just sort of the nature of it. And having 4 people involved, how do you actually do that in an efficient way that fits on a stamp or a banknote or something?
Ladies and gentlemen, I want to rewind to the chap up at the back here, who I've only just met today, but we've known for a little while. His name's actually Kirsten, and he is the author of another wonderful book about the discovery of insulin called The Crooked Timber. So if you haven't or aren't aware of that book, or you haven't read it, it's certainly worth getting a hold of a copy and diving into it. So along with Michael Bliss, that's another great author who has documented the history of discovery. I think it's worth pointing out at this point that Michael Bliss did state around about the time that his book was released that he hoped that the book would have some influence on changing the narrative on the discovery of insulin and take it away from just Banting and Best and tell the story correctly, that MacLeod was indeed the impresario, the one at the top of the tree. Banting didn't even know how to do a pancreectomy before the experiment started. So, you know, yes, MacLeod went on holiday. He was still marking papers, he was corresponding with them and all sorts. But he was the one that set them up with the experiments, showed them what they needed to do. And MacLeod was such a generous tutor and professor that he would often let students work their way through a particular problem or a particular idea that they might have had, to let them see that what they were going to do didn't actually work and why it didn't work. So he was a very generous person. He allowed people to do certain things. So back to Michael Bliss, yes, he didn't think that the narrative would change in his lifetime, but he hoped that his book would have a big influence on changing some views on the discovery. And I think that the speakers we've got here today and the ones that have to come in the afternoon will let you see that that tide is actually starting to turn. I think the expression he used would be, it would be like turning an ocean liner on a sixpence. So I think we've maybe gone a few degrees in the correct direction with the help of who's up on the stage here and who's still got to come. And we're going to have some very interesting talks to hear in the afternoon. So at this stage, I'd like to suggest to everyone, if they can make their way to the doors at the back, there's 2 ladies manning those, and there's refreshments and a surprise. Thank you very much, folks.